We've got ace-king offsuit under the gun. There's no straddle on. I raised to 30. The player on our direct left is the best opponent in the game. I've tangled with him in the last 2 vlogs from the win. In those, we got into several 3 and 4 bet battles, including some in the uncapped 10-20-40 game. Luckily, I've gotten the better of him up to this point. Under the gun +1 needs to get revenge. He 3-bets to 100. Normally, an early position 3-bet is a very strong play. We've got removal to aces and kings though. Plus, I know this particular player is extremely aggressive, so his range isn't necessarily going to consist of only premiums like it would if we were facing a 3-bet from a more passive player. Small blind inserts himself with a call into what's minimally going to be a 4-bet pot. He likely would have 4-bet pocket kings and aces if that's what he was holding. Since he didn't, I'm confident that I'll at least have 2 overs to whatever the small blind has, or we'll have him dominated. I 4-bet to 400 in a tricky spot, hoping under the gun +1 isn't at the top of his range. He must have been just messing around as he folds. The small blind is having a difficult time trying to find the fold button. With the clock winding down, he calls for 300 more. I imagine he has some sort of pocket pair like queens down to 8s, or maybe ace-king or ace-queen. We're heads up, the flop comes king 6-3 with 2 hearts. Not only did we drill top, the right suit came out so that we don't have to be very concerned about our opponent having a flush draw. The ace and king of hearts are both accounted for. It's very unlikely the small blind cold called a 3-bet, then called a 4-bet with 2 hearts that don't contain the ace or king of hearts. The opponent checks. Since I put him on hands like middle to high pocket pairs that we have crushed, and since we don't need to worry about more hearts coming out, I want to bet small to extract as much value as I can or induce a bluff. I bet 200. It's a little more than 20% of the pot. Things are going exactly according to plan as the small blind check raises to 500. I doubt he would have cold called a 3-bet, then called a 4-bet with pocket 6s or pocket 3s. There aren't any 2-pair combos that make any sense, and we ruled out aces and kings based on his pre-flop play. The best possible hand I envision the opponent having is also ace-king, but to be honest, this feels way more like a bluff attempt with a random hand. I don't want to chase his bluffs off. There's some confusion at the table because the dealer didn't hear the opponent say raise as he put out the purple $500 chip. He thought it was just a call. We make sure that gets cleared up because I feel very confident that we've got our opponent in bad shape and I want as much of his money in the middle as possible. I call for 300 more. The pot has become very large. We've got what's essentially the nuts. The turn is the 10 of spades. Pocket 10s is a somewhat plausible hand that the opponent might have check raised with to see where he's at and to fold out hands like ace-queen if that's what I see bet small on the flop with. The small blind is like the longtime talent agent for Frankenstein. He continues to rep a monster. The opponent fires for 600. The situation has become a bit dicier. Mostly, I feel pretty good about it though. We're certainly not exiting at this point. I call. A blank would be ideal at the moment. The dealer isn't interested in making life easier for us. He puts out the jack of diamonds. Now ace-queen, pocket jacks, king-jack, and jack-10 are all new hands that have us beat. They're not super likely holdings that the opponent would have, but I'm believing more and more it's possible that the small blind could have them, especially when he jams for $12.95 effective. I honestly have no clue what to put the opponent on. This line doesn't seem all that credible. I under-repped my hand on the flop. I'm not sure exactly what the small blind is trying to represent. When I can't piece together the story that the opponent is trying to tell me, I'm getting a good price, I typically stick around. After only a few seconds, I basically snap call, expecting to be beat fairly often. What's incredible about this is that since I'm getting almost 3.5 to 1 on a call, I only have to win 25% of the time for this call to be profitable. That means I can actually call and lose 75% of the time and still make money in the long run, which is absurd. We don't have to worry about losing this time.
You're good.
We get the victory with our top pair despite the board getting worse and worse for us. It's a full double that was sparked almost entirely by our small bet on the flop that induced a check raise and 2 subsequent barrels, including a bluff shove by our opponent on the river. It's sweet to get this win, acquire a few purple chips, and have plenty of wiggle room as we're firmly in Profitville for the session. It's fun to play deep stack 300 big blind games when we're able to capitalize on having a larger stack. We don't have much time to dwell on it as we pick up 8-7 suited in the big blind within the same orbit. The player on our left is straddled. He's the good pro who 3-bet when we had ace-king offsuit earlier. I raised to 80. We won't be getting it through. The straddler calls. We're heads up. The dealer puts out 8-5 deuce with 2 clubs. We've got top pair. The board isn't likely to get better for us though. I make a small bet of 60. This isn't typically going to be a terrific flop for the pre-flop raiser. Under the Gun knows I'll be c-betting with air somewhat frequently when it's essentially a blind versus blind hand. He raises to 200. We've got removal to sets and 2-pair hands, and there aren't even that many combinations of 2-pair hands that make sense since 8-5 offsuit, 8-deuce offsuit, and 5-deuce offsuit should all be folds pre-flop from the opponent. It's way more likely that the opponent either has a flush draw or one of several combinations of straight draws, including 9-7, 9-6, 7-6, 7-4, 6-4, 4-3, ace-4, or ace-3. That's a ton of possible straight draws for semi-bluffs. I call for 140 more, anticipating facing some larger bets down the line, and this board likely getting worse and worse for us. The turn is the 5 of diamonds. It's interesting because now there are even fewer set and 2-pair combos that the opponent would have raised for value with on the flop. I check. As expected, we're about to see a big bet. Under the Gun gathers chips and bets 360. With fewer combos that we're losing to that would have raised for value on the flop, including 8-deuce suited that's counterfeited, I feel better about sticking around. I call again, knowing that we could be drawing close to dead and that our opponent is fully capable of putting us to a very difficult decision on the river, whether it's a blank or not, and whether he has a speed or not. The dealer puts out the Queen of Diamonds. At first glance, it may seem like a bad card because our hand has been downgraded to second pair, but it actually doesn't change almost anything since the flush draw misses, as does every single one of the 8 different straight draws. I check. A check back would be great. We don't get it though. We don't even get a reasonable sizing from the opponent. He goes massive and overbets to 2,000. He's saying that he has trip 5s or better. We've had 3 tough river decisions in a row, including 2 shoves and now a $2,000 bet that's actually for a larger amount than the 2 shoves we faced. The first line the opponent took with pocket 9s didn't really make sense the entire way, so I snap called. The second line that our opponent took with ace-king offsuit was very convincing, even though it was a bluff. This third line is somewhere in between the first two. Under the Gun's been telling a believable story that he's been strong since the flop, but our removal and the 5 pairing on the turn has made his story less credible. One good thing that we have going for us is that we don't have the 7 of clubs or the 7 of hearts in our hand, so we unblock very strong combo draws that might have raised us on the flop that missed. I could still go either way between calling and folding. I just incorrectly folded minutes ago to miss out on winning $5,000. I'm still reeling from that. I definitely don't want to compound that with an incorrect call when the opponent actually has it. Against certain opponents, I'd snap fold. Against someone who's very good and is a thinking player, it's too difficult for me to get away from it when I know that he'll have a lot of bluffs in his range. I reluctantly toss in a calling chip, only to see the opponent takes me to the deepest part of Value Town with 5-4 offsuit. He got a great run out to win the absolute maximum from me with trips. His 5 looks a little strange though. That's because it's actually a 3. He misses open-ended straight draw with 4-3 offsuit.
I just got bluffed. I can't get bluffed again.
The opponent isn't even upset about losing. He's impressed that we were able to find the call after he does well to put us to the test. It's unfortunate for him that he tried to pull an enormous overbet bluff immediately after I just made a promise to you guys that I'd never fold to a river bet again. I guess somehow he didn't hear me say that. In this one, we've got pocket 5s in the small blind. A handful of players have left our table to play the uncapped 10-20 game that's just opened, including the player who just attempted the bluff against us. Some new players have arrived, including a player who straddles from under the gun. The middle position opponent limps in. The hijack calls for 20. We don't want to reopen the pot, and it's fine if we have more opponents, so I don't mind going multi-way. We call for 15 more. The big blind calls. He's a new player as well. The under the gun straddler needs to punish us limpers. He raises to 120. The middle position player calls for 100 more. It's too much for the hijack. He folds. I don't mind playing an inflated pot with a hand that'll be easy to play post-flop. I call for 100 more. The big blind also calls. We're going 4 ways to the flop. Hit the like button on the count of 3 for some extra run good. Ready? 1, 2, 3. The flop comes 5-5-3 with 2 hearts. Because of you, we flop quads in what's already a pretty big pot. I check, hoping someone has an overpair or is going to fire while drawing dead. The big blind checks. The under the gun straddler was the pre-flop raiser. He's our best candidate to take a shot. He bets 200. That'll be ours soon. The player in middle position has no regrets in life except for entering this pot. He folds. There's no way that we'll be check raising on this street. I call to keep the bluffs in. The big blind folds. It's down to heads up. I'm rooting for a high card that'll give our opponent whatever he thinks he needs. Instead, the turn is the 3 of clubs. It's one of the worst cards that we could have gotten because it's really unlikely that our opponent has a 3. In his mind, we could have one. Now that the board is double paired, if the opponent bets, a call from me will look incredibly suspicious. It won't look like I've got a flush draw. It'll look like I've got a boat or better. I check, somewhat expecting the turn card to freeze the opponent. Under the gun, isn't ready to give up just yet. He bets 400 and is 100% drawing dead now. The turn was a blank. I'd flat this bet with hopes of getting an opportunity to check jam the river. I think the river will check through at an extremely high percentage if I called though. No matter what I do, it'll be a tough task to get more money from the opponent. I raised to 1,000 on this street to try and make it look like I'm bluffing with either a flush draw or maybe a straight draw. Ideally, this check raise would look odd and either induce a call from an overpair or even ace high or possibly induce a bluff shove. Maybe the plan is working out to perfection as the opponent asks to get a count on my stack.
I think I have you covered.
There's no better feeling in poker than when you have the nuts and the opponent is clearly considering jamming it on you while you know that he has 0 outs. I suppose a slightly better feeling would be if he actually does jam on you. In this case, he folds. It's easy to beat myself up over that one and wish that I had called instead. Perhaps I pulled the trigger a little too early. Calling and then leading the river for a small or medium amount, almost regardless of the card, would have been a pretty interesting play too. It's not that often that I flop quads. We still win a good chunk to increase our profit to over 4,700. Pick up pocket aces for the first time today in the cutoff. A player in middle position does some of the heavy lifting for us by raising to 40. He's another pro. He's probably the new first or second toughest opponent for us at the table. You can see him sitting right across from us. I'll give you one guess as to the continent he's from. I'll give you a clue. He's not from North America, South America, Africa, Australia, or Asia. That's right, he's Antarctican. I 3-bet to 140 to pump this pot up a little. The opponent isn't impressed with how much we pump. He pumps it back to 540. Sometimes in poker there are some reg battles that occur when 2 players are going at each other to either establish dominance or because they know the other is capable of 3 or 4 betting light. That could be what's going on here, but I don't get that sense so much. The opponent started the hand with over 4,700. We'd like to acquire all of it, and the sooner we get the money in, the better. I 5-bet to 1,100, giving the opponent an opportunity to either call or 6-bet jam. 5 bets are very rare. The opponent looks at me as if to say, I've got a strong hand. We both got big stacks. Do you really want to play for all of it against me here? The answer is yes, I do. He's getting 3 to 1 and can't fold any pocket pair or a hand like ace-king, or maybe even ace-queen suited. He calls. We're heads up with over 2,000 in the middle already. Effective stack to pot ratio is low, meaning it'll be easy to get the rest of the chips in the middle. The flop comes queen 10-7 rainbow. It's not the best because we could be up against pocket queens, and pocket kings won't feel comfortable putting in tons of money since that hand doesn't beat aces or queens. Ace-king is also live against us. The opponent checks. If we're up against a set, he's just going to double up through me and win a pot of over $9,000 in a 5-10 game because I'm not going to be folding aces after 5-betting. It doesn't help to worry about that at the moment. Instead, I need to target hands that I'm beating and figure out a way to extract the max from pocket kings and ace-king. If the player has ace-king, he won't be able to call a large bet because in a 5-bet pot, he'll either be chopping or he'll be drawing extremely slim on this flop. A jack is the only card that he'll feel good about seeing. I make a significant down bet to 600 so that the opponent basically has to call with ace-king, ace-queen, kings, or even jacks. If he does call, he'll have less than a pot-sized bet left in his stack, all by design. The small sizing should look a lot like I could have ace-king, with hopes of keeping control of the pot while getting to see a turn relatively cheaply, and perhaps even a river cheaply if I want to check back the turn. The opponent only calls, which he still might have done with top set. There are just way more combos of hands that we're beating than there are top set. The turn is the 5 of diamonds. It's a blank, except there's a flush draw out there now, and the ace of diamonds is unaccounted for. The opponent checks. He's got just over 3,000 in his stack. We've got him covered. It wouldn't be super unreasonable to jam, but what exactly would that accomplish? Every combination of ace-king other than ace-king of diamonds would snap fold. Ace-queen would probably feel inclined to fold also, and we saw me fold pocket kings on a queen-high board to a shove in a similar spot earlier. A shove may fold out every hand that I'm beating and only get called by top set. I go a very tricky route with a check back. As long as a jack doesn't come out, I'll be fairly confident that we've got the best hand. His check back will look a ton like we've got ace-king, and it could induce some bluff shoves from our opponent if he has ace-king, and we can still shove on the river to get maximum value out of kings and ace-queen hands. Potentially, we can even get called light by pocket jacks. The river is another 10. There really aren't any 10s that the opponent will have in his range, other than maybe some tiny percentage of the time he'll have pocket 10s, and there's only one combo of that possible. Overall, I feel good about a non-diamond 10 coming out. I feel even better as the opponent checks. After we check back the turn, I'd anticipate the opponent betting or shoving for value with queens full, though there's a possibility that he could be checking to induce a bluff shove. Now is when we make our play. We're going to go for it all, and either get snap called by a boat, get a snap fold out of ace-king, or we'll see the opponent go into the tank with a worse hand that he'll feel obligated to call with, knowing that he's getting over 2-1. It's the moment of truth.
On?
We don't get snap called, so we almost for sure have the best hand. A small c-bet and check back on the flop, followed by a shove on the river, should look very suspect. It should look like I'm making a desperate last-ditch effort to steal this pot with ace-king to potentially get my opponent off a chop or get him to fold a hand like ace-queen or kings. The player clearly doesn't have ace-king as he's taking his time contemplating what to do. I don't envy his situation at all. I was in nearly the same one with probably the same hand on a very similar board. If he calls, this will be the biggest pot that I've ever won in a 5-10 game. I've never been in a hand like this down the street at Bellagio in the 1500 cap game. The biggest pot I've won in the 5-10 there is maybe 5,500 to 6,000. We still need to get called if we want to eclipse that amount, and I know our opponent is good enough to fold. I can tell that he's not happy, but after over a minute, he puts in the calling chip. We give him the bad news. We win the biggest pot that I've ever won in a 5-10 game. There was no straddle on this hand, so it's truly a pot of over 900 big blinds in what I'm sure is a cooler situation. There's some tiny chance that we got called by jacks due to our line appearing strange, but it's way more probable that the opponent had pocket kings. We were able to win the absolute max from a solid pro. He wants to buy back the chips that we acquired from him. Rather than pushing his stack to us, he takes out 3 yellow 1K chips to hand over to us instead. What I was already considering to be a great day has gotten even better for us. We've got 12,700 in our stack, and we're only in for 3,000.